I really loved sort of entering into another world for a bit of time because it always fed back into dance anyway. But it just felt really sane for me to kind of move into a sort of parallel but different state where I could just process a bit differently.
Hello, my name is Eline Perez and you're listening to Are You an Artist? Today's episode is with Marina Collard, who speaks about painting, performance, craniosacral therapy and sense of humour. I really enjoyed this conversation. Marina is great, she's bright and funny. So get a cup of tea and have a fantastic time listening to this episode. Dear Marina, when I created this podcast a year ago, your name was one of the first on my guest list. On top of being a very inspiring human being, you are one of my best dance teachers. You helped me discover new approaches to movement and improvisation while growing care and curiosity towards my body. I also love your paintings, film works and performances, your sense of humor and the clothes you wear. Thank you so much for coming here, and let's start with the first question I ask in this podcast. Marina, are you an artist?
Oh, yes, I am an artist. Yeah.
How would you define that? Because some people really struggle to...
I think I'm just beginning to own that title, if you like, or that label.
Yeah.
And that's because I suppose more recently I've much more clearly broadened into more disciplines with about as much output, maybe, or however you want to, making as I am or have done in dance. So everything's almost feels like it's more or less on the same level. Of course, I'm more experienced in some ways, some things than others, and because I've sort of really bridged into the visual arts, I think it feels much easier somehow because everybody's just immediately an artist. Somehow in dance, sorry, that's a bit of a silly thing, but of course you can say I'm a painter or whatever, but somehow that term artist has felt easier to own in the last year, actually. It always used to make me cringe a bit. Because I think you know this from my work. I think I'm really interested in the everyday, in the ordinary. And so I've always had a bit of resistance towards claiming that title, if you like, or that thing of an artist, in case it sort of feels like, oh, I'm better than, or I'm different, or I'm... Yeah. That's... Yeah, so I'm just letting go of that a bit.
And with dance, you started with ballet, right?
Well, yes, I did. I was 5. I mean, I always moved a lot, and my sister was older and she was dancing, and my nan was a dancer. So, not ballet. I mean, she just did all kinds of stuff,
Okay.
So I always moved a lot, and then I also, at the age of 5, started going to class. But because we lived in Italy, as far as we knew, that ballet was the only thing that was on offer. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't so much that it had to be ballet. It just was the thing that was dance class.
Yeah.
And then when I came to the UK at 10, 11, I then started doing other things like jazz and...
How did you find that?
I kind of loved it because I thought it was so exciting and I was, so different to what I'd been used to. So, yes, I carried on with the ballet, but I did jazz and I did everything I possibly could. And, I mean, that was in like a youth centre, so I just got involved with everything they offered, really.
And how did you decide to train as a dancer then?
I didn't get on with school so brilliantly. I think dance was always a real escape for me. Like, I would just run and do more classes because that's where I felt good, if you like. So I wasn't ever into some kind of, again, a sort of fantasy of I want to be a dancer or something. But I just did tons and tons of dance because I just loved it.
Yeah.
And I really needed to be physical. So I think for me at school, sitting still, that whole kind of sitting on
I hated it also.
I just found that really kind of challenging. And I can't think very well if I'm stuck sitting. So I'd be at school kind of going, oh. So I needed to move a lot. And then I went to see my sister's friend, wanted to see The Fall, and it was sort of 1985, 86. And they were like this big band that was playing with Michael Clark because she was really into the band. Mm. And so I went to see this show. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, I'm doing this. Whatever that is, I don't even know. I didn't have like a dance education. I just moved a lot and thought this is just really exciting. Mm. So I think at that point I was like, I know I'm doing that, probably. But when I left school after my O-levels, it's GCSEs now or whatever, but I did A-levels and I did art A-levels basically. Mm. So I spent 2 years just in the art room making things and painting and doing
so you were already painting. I was curious about that.
Yeah. I was really into it. And somehow I was going to apply to art school and I applied to dance school, but the dance school thing kind of, once I got a place, I just typically as a young person got a bit like, oh, well, I'll just do that. That's sorted, so I'll carry on with that. Rather than I didn't think about it that much. It's like I got into dance school, great, I'll do that. I'll worry about the other stuff at another point. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to say it was sort of a thought through, like, oh, I could do, what's the order to do it? And it wasn't that, I thought through. It was like, great, I've got a place, I'll do that then, Yeah.
And did you keep like painting and drawing and... Or did you stop for a bit and then came back to it?
Yeah, I stopped for a bit. And after about 10 years of being in dance, really, I started to really crave it. Mm. And so then I would, maybe if there was like a summer break, I used to just really like being in a room on my own with some paper, canvas, whatever. But I think there's some sort of solitude that comes with that I started to really appreciate. Mm. And then as the time went on, I'd do the odd week of like short courses or something. I'd go and do an oil painting course. And and I really loved sort of entering into another world for a bit of time because it always fed back into dance anyway. Mm-hmm. But it just felt really sane for me to kind of move into a sort of different, parallel but different state where I could just process a bit differently.
Yeah.
And then go back to dance.
Mm-hmm. And how do you create something? Do you sit down and let things come, or do you have impulses? And
it's interesting you're asking me that because I've been in a phase of doing quite a lot of painting.
Yeah.
And recently I've been thinking, I really want to get back to some performance. So I actually need to pay attention to that, to think about what kind of thing I might want to do. Mm-hmm. So I think I might have an instinct for something that I want to do, and that's not usually something that I can clarify in my head. I just have to start working and then I start to understand it. Mm-hmm. So I think at the moment that's getting explored in paint, and I sort of feel like, well, I could keep going there, but if I don't sort of bridge into a slightly other area, then the questions that come around in my painting are less rich, feel to me. I'm not saying, I'm sure. So I think moving between media feels really important. But in a way, I feel like I'm always wondering about something, or have a kind of feeling in my body that I have to express this thing. And I don't know what it is until I start working, whether it turns out in movement or paint or anything else. Mm. I don't know whether that's a bit obscurely sounding. But yeah, I think it's a way of thinking through the body and processing through the body. So if living means understanding the world through kind of processing physically, then questions come up or stuff gets uncomfortable or, there's something that I feel I have to work through. Yeah.
And then how do you decide when something is finished, when a work is finished?
That's a great question too. So in paint, for example, I notice that I've kind of go, I think that's finished, but I sort of probably know that it isn't. And then I have to leave it for a bit and come back to it. And sometimes that happens just once, and sometimes it happens 2 or 3 times. Where I have to keep kind of going, I think that's finished. I'm just going to leave it there for a bit, and then I come back. And sometimes I really leave it, or sometimes I kind of go, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. Or, and in dance, I suppose you have the luxury, because I'm working a little bit with set material and a little bit with improvisation at the same, within the same work, that sort of slight instability of it's not 100% secure, so it's not 100% fixed. Now, of course, you could say that about any performance, but that's kind of at the heart of the work that I make, that it's not 100% settled. Then it always kind of develops a little bit.
Yeah.
It doesn't ever quite stay still, I think.
Yeah.
But then there is also that tension of how do you make sure it stays the same work? So you just have to go back to the parameters of what it is that you're doing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
And I'm also very curious because you've been teaching choreography quite a bit. And how do you do that? Because everybody's so different, and how do you find ways to help?
That's a really good question. I really like that problem because it is a problem. That's what it feels like to me. It's like a kind of part of me tries to get inside people's
brain.
Or I try and sort of see through them to understand what they're trying to do. I try and sort of inhabit them for a bit to try and perceive something that I can't always do it, but mostly I can. And I think the thing that I also try and do is try and ask the questions about the stuff that I don't get about what they're doing. And usually that's also the area where they're not very clear, and it helps them clarify. Or the other thing I think I do is like I might have an association to another work, and sometimes just cross-referencing stuff that isn't relevant or could be relevant. It just means that you slightly rearrange somebody's view of what they're doing. So it's like sort of provoking them to rethink what they're doing. Not everything, but just it's
to
like
be a bit clearer in a way.
Or get them to like mold it. So if it was a sculpture, you're sort of giving them things to just push this thing around a little bit so they can discover more. You're helping them discover more about what they're doing. That's what I think.
And I remember also as a teacher, you were very honest, and I really appreciated that, because it's really not a lot of teachers who really tell you or ask you the questions. And do you know why?
Very good question. So there's a slightly 2 strands for me. I think because of not being 100% English, there's something about just being much more blunt or to the point. That is one thing. But also I just feel like somehow there's a fear of, I don't know what that's about. I feel like there's a fear of
hurting?
Challenging or hurting, But I think my feeling is maybe it's a little bit different now, but I think most students want to make better work. So I suppose I just trust that even if I say something that feels really inappropriate, not like offensive, I mean like that's a kind of suggestion that's completely off, it will still make them go, no, it's not that at all, it's this. It will still help define. So there's something about just putting in some provocations and just being honest about what's not making sense. To me, makes them make more sense to themselves. But I know what you mean. I think my experience also when I came to the UK was this, I was kind of confused. You'd be getting feedback that was sort of nothing. And I think, well, what does that mean? I don't know. You've just said a load of words that seem quite nice.
It's just like good work. Okay, you're my tutor, so...
I think there is bite, maybe. I don't know. I think there's not that much bite. But I think the language is part of the problem. The way everything's constructed linguistically.
It's very polite also here. It's very formulated to, try not to hurt or disturb too much.
Maybe suggest that, maybe blah, blah, rather than that's not working, you know. You can't sort of just cut through all the... Yeah. I don't know. Personally, I feel like it's a bit of a waste of time. You'd only have so much time, and the quicker you can just get in there. Again, not like horrible, but just... Because also if you wait too much or if you're too nice about stuff, then the further you go on, the more difficult it is to disrupt it or to question it.
Exactly, yeah.
The earlier
and you've lost maybe the momentum also or something, and then
And people get attached to their work, so they'll have invested another 3 weeks. So it's more difficult to take the fact that it's not. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
It's better to just open that conversation quite quickly. Yeah.
And do you feel very attached to your work? How do you feel like when something is finished, and are you proud, or are you just letting it go and going into something else? Or
yeah, it's funny. A bit of both. Like, I think some things, I mean, it feels like when I've done them, I let them go, you know, that I let them sort of exist as separate entities from, you know, and everything I do, I think, informs the next thing. So, but some things I have an attachment to in terms of I love it more, but that doesn't mean I want to keep it.
Yeah.
I just might be happier with it or something.
Yeah.
And other things I'm a bit like, yeah, it's okay, but I don't love it in the same way or something. Yeah.
And how is your work perceived in different places? Because same, you play also with comfort, discomfort, and you've worked like here, but also in France, in Italy, in Delhi.
Yeah. Actually, I was having this conversation about the performance work that I've done recently, that most of it has always been in Rome because I was there doing stuff in the streets of Rome. And I really want to do some more. And there was this sort of, I was talking to my partner about this thing of like, do I need to go back to Rome? Because it's almost like, of course I could do something in London, but it feels like there's, where you locate these things really matters, how those dialogues kind of evolve. So location is really interesting, so that you kind of, when I say tension, I mean like in a really gentle way. So it's not an aggressive sort of confrontation, but just something that's a little bit off or just sits a little bit away from the agreed every day almost. You know, there's just that bringing a little question to what's okay or whatever. I mean, in Delhi, that was really gorgeous because I think in a way there are differences, but people are always people.
Yeah.
So the people that I worked with in Delhi felt very much the same as people I might work with in London in terms of processing and how they grew, how they found their own thing and how we built the work. That doesn't feel particularly different. I think maybe it had more impact there at that moment because they hadn't quite worked like that before.
Yeah.
Whilst maybe there's more, or maybe I'm surrounded by people that are not so different as well here.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a bit of a difference. But
have you done one performance in London and in Delhi and in Rome? Like the same one?
Yes. Yeah. And actually that's interesting. Delhi, loads of people really loved it. And that was really nice. They were really, really vocal and really talking to me after. And that boundary, that sort of slightly uncomfortable thing that you might get here felt not there. That was really delightful. I was like, oh, great. You know, it just felt very good. I'm sure there were other boundaries, but I didn't pick up on them because it's not what I'm dealing with every day.
Yeah.
So I found it really refreshing and great. And yeah, Rome was quite nice. Rome, I did it in the art school, so the fact that it wasn't like an audience that was particularly performance-based, most of the people hadn't really seen any dance. It was much harder for me to judge how it had landed.
Yeah.
And then actually a few months later, some people might have said, oh, that show, blah, 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 you know. But at the time, I couldn't really tell what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably some people thought it was very boring. But I think when people are used to seeing stuff that's static, moving to time-based performance can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
Or like they have to, they don't have the agency to flip towards and away in the same way. But a couple of people, one woman actually said to me, oh my God, I watched that and I just was crying and I cried for about an hour afterwards.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. I was really moved by that. I thought, oh, crikey, okay, she said she just felt like she resonated. She doesn't even know why, but she massively resonated with stuff. So it's that meeting, isn't it? It's how you meet the people that might catch your work, really.
Yeah.
Not that I'm looking for that response or anything, but...
No, but it's quite nice because, like, also depending on what they're going through in life and what you're going through and that, and yeah.
Yeah, because the piece is still going. It's that point where I'm like, you know, it's the retirement crisis, the dance retirement crisis piece where I'm like, oh, you know, can I keep doing this? Can I not? What am I doing? You know, all those questions. So I suppose that's sort of...
Yeah, a lot of people can probably feel something.
Yeah, even though you don't know, it's totally in the work. And of course, the actual narrative isn't the same, but those kind of crises we're having all the time, aren't we?
Exactly.
Like, so, yeah, I can imagine it would have resonated somehow.
And in London?
Oh, in London it was great, actually. I think in London I had a lot of people that I trusted from the dance world, that a number of people whose views I really trust, who I know would never just be nice for the sake of it or say, oh, it's really great, or, you know, just really engaged and really kind of like that section or that thing or that, you know, quite pointing to elements that had really stood out. Or I mean, there's one bit where I repeat the same thing. It's like, you know, a thing of futility, and I repeat it and then you'd sort of think it's done and I'll do it again. And it's always a little bit different, but I just kind of, and then I do it backwards. And somebody I know was like, and then when you did it backwards, I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And I couldn't believe it. And it just became this whole thing. I was like, oh, wow, okay.
It's funny, I was watching something and I think I'm really drawn to, like, when you are not expecting something, you know, when you think something is finished and actually keeps going, or when they just start something and then that's already over and you're like, what? It's like, it really draws your attention.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I think maybe that's also what I'm exploring in painting, like how much do you give away, how much do you get yourself out of the way to let people be. So it's something about how much you give, or the ongoingness, or, you know, that those time lengths, or but it has a massive impact on what's actually going on in terms of the context and what you're offering. It's really exciting, that.
Yeah, this weekend I was doing a workshop with Kirstie Simson.
Oh.
And she like shares how she always stopped the performance just a bit before it's finished.
Yeah.
And then people come back.
Nice.
She's like, otherwise it just goes on and you lose it, especially improvised performances.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting, to just stop a little bit before you think it's actually finished.
Yeah, and I think there's something about not wanting to give people everything.
Yeah.
Not because you're being kind of obtuse or awkward, but because you don't want to just spill yourself all over them. You just want to give something to let them have space in it.
Yeah.
You're not trying to just fill it up. Or you can't. You should. But that's my feeling.
I feel the same, and when I'm given space, actually, I'm really engaging with a work. So that's a really nice.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm just
experience.
I just want it. I want them to back off. Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
I'm going to live this through. You are also a craniosacral therapist.
Mm-hmm.
How do you describe that to people who have no idea about what this is?
That's really difficult. In the past, I've sort of said that it's like a body work. It's, you know, I usually say it's like a massage, but I don't really massage people. It's very, very gentle.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, it's nothing like massage, but that's familiar.
Yeah.
And I think to actually start to try and describe what's going on isn't helpful. Because it's sort of, once you've experienced it, you might be able to relate those words to what that experience was. If you've never had cranio and I start going on about the fluids in the body, I mean, I think they'd go, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Unless they particularly want to know, or they're moving people, or, but if they really have no kind of body practice or way of relating to it, I just try and make it as ordinary as possible. Yes, I usually just say it's a bit like massage, but I don't really massage it. It's really good for stress. So it might be that people fall asleep on the bed, it like down regulates. Those are the sort of things that I might say. Mm-hmm. And no more. Otherwise it feels a bit hocus, woo.
Halloween is coming.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some magic thing. And how do you keep this interest? Because you've been doing this since 2010. Mm-hmm. How did it evolve?
Yeah, I really love the work. I think there's something a bit like any of those things when you enter into those kinds of relationships with people. You could say that about teaching, but it's a little bit more sparse.
Yeah.
At that moment, particularly in cranio, like at that moment, they're the only thing that matters. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to make the person be more themselves, if you like, which is partly I do in my teaching. But so if they're trying to get better, you're trying to get them back to health or back to, but basically it's about them returning more to themselves and feeling more themselves and feeling better. Mm-hmm. That's a bit crass way of putting it. But so you're witnessing people's process, I suppose, to some degree.
Yeah.
Of course, not everything, because a lot happens out after and blah, blah, blah. But you're with their vulnerabilities, with all these things. And of course, that totally resonates in yourself as you're working, and you have to kind of keep clear. So one thing is that I feel like you always learn from your clients. Mm-hmm. So it's not a one-way thing. Mm-hmm. I have to really give myself to that to be able to be with people. I also have to kind of give myself my own kind of thinking and check my own stuff and do all that whilst I'm with that person, which I wouldn't do with that same commitment if it wasn't necessary. I'd probably be a bit flippant. Well, I'll just go and have a cup of tea. Whilst I have to confront certain things.
Yeah.
So that I find really interesting.
And everybody must be so different also. So
yeah. So those relationships are quite rich, really rich, and a bit similar to work. You really have to get out of the way. So I'm talking about that relationship, but you're not merging with them. You're not trying to make them dependent. You're making sure that they find themselves fully. Getting out of the way is really important, I think. So the work's really beautiful. When you see progress, you see changes, it's really exciting. I think it's quite humbling. So for all of those things, it's really great.
Do you feel like this has changed your approach to relationships with people?
That's a good question.
This giving of space, letting them be, but being there, and
I think it's probably informed it in terms of being much more conscious of giving people a lot of permission, of like kind of appreciating the range of different people. More appreciation, I think. Yeah. Giving more time to things that don't necessarily align with me in the most obvious ways.
Do you have inspirations? Like artists you follow or books or?
Yeah, quite a few. I think I've always turned to painting, even when I wasn't really painting. So colour, I really love colour, what happens in colour somehow. So actually I was just looking at a painting by Frank Bowling this morning before I came over. It's really beautiful, I love his work. People like Phoebe Boswell are amazing. Marlene Dumas. There's a lot of extraordinary. I don't think there's any one. I think I quite like seeing a lot.
Yeah.
again, I think because the approaches are so different, or the way that paint is, or how much they fill stuff up, or how much they make space, or so there's something kind of choreographic about the way that I'm looking at the works. And then for performance stuff, yeah, lots of different things in dance, I think. I'm actually going to go and see Tim Etchells and Meg Stuart at the Place. I had a lot of do I, don't I, shall I not? It's quite expensive, oh God, but then I just thought, just do it, otherwise you never do anything.
Okay.
Oh, and Marin, I think, is amazing. She's my recent kind of like... I saw a piece in Rome that I completely loved. It's 4 dancers with hula hoops and a musician on stage. But the whole thing was like a painting. It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the whole way that the light, the sound, the mood, everything was so integrated into a thing. I can't begin to kind of explain it without... You have to see it. That really blew me away. I thought that's a complete alignment of visual art and movement. Video. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Okay, random questions. What makes you laugh?
Silly things make me laugh. Like, there's a little bit of it in a video that I made when I was in Rome where this bloke walks... it just happens to be in my camera, but he's just walking, and then he does this thing and he picks his leg up. So something's obviously bothering him, either in his trousers or his foot. So he does this kind of weird like thing, and then carries on walking. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That just the fact that that's been caught, and it's nothing. Like nobody else noticed it. It's nothing. He probably doesn't. You know, it's nothing, but brilliant. That really makes me laugh. Catching those things that are kind of, they're nothing, but if you just choose to notice it, they're fantastic.
Like, yeah. Do you like to go to the supermarket?
Yes, I do, yeah. Yes and no. I mean, sometimes it depends. It depends a bit. If I'm in a process, I go, oh God, do I really have to do that? But I can really get lost down a supermarket.
Do you make a list before?
No, so I'll be totally shopping. It's totally honest. So I have gone to the supermarket and come back with 3 boxes of tea before because it was on a deal, and I got completely like, this is brilliant, and came back with no food at all. My partner was like, what are you doing? So he obviously I can be functional, but he quite often goes, I've got a list, should we just go, I'll do that. And he'll just kind of, I mean, I can do that as well, but...
That's so funny.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can be effective at different levels and different different moments of my life.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, I love Indian food. If that's a sort of broad brushstroke, really love it. I could eat rice and dal and curry every day. And I love pizza, but not here. In Rome, I can eat pizza every day, no problem.
Yeah.
Here, I'd be like, great, but not all the time, or whatever. And also, it just feels like you can have just a pizza rossa, it's just pizza and tomato on it, just bread and tomato, basically. But, like super simple, so you can just get your slice and sod off. It doesn't always have to be the anyway, It's more flexible. Probably that, yeah.
Do you prefer silence or small talk?
That's a good question. I don't think I'm good at small talk. Probably silence. I really like talking to people when I know them.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the chat, meeting groups, and that I'm not so good at. So in that case, probably silence.
If you could live a parallel life, so you still have your life, but just another one, what would you do?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I don't know if I can... I think I'd like to have more... I suppose it's that thing, I'd like to have more time, more like another life running alongside where I do the things that I feel I can't do now. Sounds a bit cringy, but I think I'd like to be more helpful in the world.
Mm. I know my best friend is finishing training as a doctor, and now I'm like, okay.
Yeah. But I think there's some part of me that feels like we can't all be brilliant, and I can only do what I can do.
Yeah.
And my priorities, my work at the moment, I know it's selfish and everything else, but yeah.
What do you think about pets?
I've never had one.
Yeah.
So...
Because I found this a bit funny now that I think about that. People having dogs, and having cats and...
Yeah. I suppose it just feels like then if you're going to do anything, you have to worry about them, or I think also you have, I don't know, maybe if people live in places where it makes sense to have an animal because it can run around or something or other. I don't know.
But in London, I see dogs going to pubs,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
with very loud music and stuff. And I'm like, I would love to have a dog. I love dogs.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit also, oh.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit like they've become a bit of a handbag.
Yeah.
Sorry. But, so it's particularly in COVID, there was already quite a lot of dogs around because it was sort of fashionable and there's these sort of fashion dogs. And then COVID, and then everyone's got a dog. I don't know. It's funny. People were saying, oh, it's because it was an excuse to go for a walk. And I thought, well, you can just go for a walk, can't you? I don't know. So it's not for me, basically. Yeah. I really like animals. I'm fine, but I don't really want to have to live with one because
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to own one.
Mm-hmm. And if you could have dinner with anyone, alive or dead?
I'm going to just pitch this one because maybe Frank Albach, but there'd be hundreds of other people that I could do that with.
Yeah.
But maybe about a month or two ago, I listened to his podcast again, This Cultural Life, I think it is, that he's on, and he's just beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's great.